Welcome back, Jikook lover. Before you watch any further, hit like right now, subscribe to this channel, and drop your thoughts in the comments because what we're about to talk about is not a normal airport moment. Picture this: a crowded airport, constant noise, cameras everywhere, and then 3 seconds, just 3 seconds, a head slightly lowered, a hand adjusting a cap, and suddenly everything goes quiet. No screams, no chaos, just silence. Why did everyone freeze? Why did this moment feel heavier than thousands of airport sightings before it? And if this was really just coincidence, why does it feel like something much bigger just started? Only 3 seconds at the airport, but why did everything suddenly go silent? No one was prepared for this moment. Not the fans who thought they had seen everything. Not the cameras that had captured countless airport appearances before. Not even the airport itself, a place that thrives on movement, noise, and urgency. That day was supposed to be ordinary. Flights arrived and departed on schedule. People rushed past one another without looking twice. Nothing suggested that anything unusual was about to happen. And yet, something did. From a distance, a figure appeared. Calm, unhurried, almost too composed for a place built on constant motion. No waving, no acknowledgement of the cameras that instinctively began to rise. A cap pulled low, a hoodie framing a silhouette that felt hauntingly familiar. No one shouted a name, yet everyone seemed to know why their attention had shifted. Then came the 3 seconds. A hand moved behind the head. The cap was adjusted ever so slightly. Strands of hair fell forward in a way that felt impossibly recognizable. A brief downward glance followed. Nothing dramatic, nothing staged. And still the atmosphere changed instantly. The noise faded. The air grew heavy. It wasn't excitement that filled the space, it was restraint. A collective pause, as if everyone present understood that this moment required silence. Why wasn't anyone screaming? Why didn't the crowd surge forward? Why did every camera seem to hesitate? That hesitation is where the mystery begins. If this were just another traveler, none of this would have happened. And if this were undeniably him, why did it feel like everyone was pretending not to notice? The video surfaced online within minutes. No official statement, no confirmation, just a short clip, replayed endlessly, slowed down, zoomed in, dissected frame by fans across the globe. The comments didn't express certainty, they expressed recognition. If that's not him, why does the gesture feel exactly the same? Why does that detail match? Why does the aura feel so familiar? Why does this feel different? These questions multiplied, building a narrative far larger than a single airport appearance. This wasn't about fashion. It wasn't about a face. It was about presence. About a feeling that longtime fans recognized instantly but struggled to explain. What made the moment even more suspicious was the timing. It came after weeks of subtle shifts in the fandom's atmosphere. After whispers that never quite disappeared. After names began circulating again without context or confirmation. And now, the airport, of all places, became the stage for a moment too precise to dismiss. Fans began comparing habits, not photos. The way the head tilts, the instinctive movement when adjusting a cap, the posture that hasn't changed despite time and distance. These were not random observations. They were memories resurfacing, triggered by a few seconds of footage. Some tried to dismiss it as collective imagination, a fandom projecting longing onto an anonymous figure. But that argument weakened with every matching detail. Too many small things aligned. Too many familiar patterns reappeared. And perhaps the most unsettling part of all was what didn't happen. There was no signature smile, no friendly acknowledgement, no attempt to reassure the cameras. Why? Was it exhaustion? Was it caution? Or was something being deliberately protected? Speculation exploded. Some spoke of undisclosed projects. Others hinted at meetings never announced. And inevitably, one theory returned again and again, the one that always ignites debate while pulling the fandom closer together. Because if one appeared like this, quietly and without explanation, could another be just as close? Was this silence a coincidence or a signal? Airports have always been more than transit points. They are places of beginnings and endings, of reunions unseen and departures unspoken. And those 3 seconds felt like a fragment of a story still unfolding, one that hasn't yet revealed its next chapter. Hour by hour, theories grew more intricate. Fans analyzed shadows, reflections, even background figures. Not because they wanted drama, but because history had taught them that the smallest details often precede the biggest reveals. And now, here we are. A fleeting moment that should have vanished into the timeline has instead become a global conversation. Not because of spectacle, but because of silence. Because sometimes, silence carries more meaning than noise ever could. Because the loudest moments aren't always shouted. Sometimes, they arrive quietly and stay with us. And the biggest question now isn't who that person was. It's what this moment was preparing us for. Why it felt so deliberate. Why it felt like restraint, not absence. If 3 seconds were enough to make the world pause. The discussion did not slow down. If anything, it intensified. What began as a short clip quickly evolved into something much larger, something that felt almost alive. Across platforms, fans weren't just watching anymore, they were remembering. Old interviews resurfaced. Past airport moments were replayed side by side with the new footage. Not to prove anything definitively, but to understand why this moment felt so unsettlingly familiar. There was a pattern forming, and people could feel it. The way the shoulders relaxed despite the surrounding pressure. The way the head dipped instead of lifting when attention grew too heavy. These were not behaviors learned overnight. They were habits shaped over years of being watched, followed, and analyzed. Habits that belonged to someone who knew exactly how visible they were, even when trying not to be. And that was the heart of the mystery. If the goal was anonymity, why appear at all? If the goal was distance, why not avoid the camera's line entirely? And if this appearance was unavoidable, why did it feel so controlled? Some fans described it as restraint. Others called it quiet confidence. But a growing number began to interpret it as preparation. As if the silence wasn't accidental, but intentional. As if this was not a return, but a reminder. Theories branched out in every direction. Some believed this moment was meant to test the waters, to see how the world would react after so much absence. Others argued it was nothing more than coincidence magnified by fandom emotion. Yet even those who tried to stay neutral admitted one thing felt off in a way they couldn't ignore. The timing. Because this moment didn't happen in isolation. It followed subtle shifts that fans had been noticing for weeks. Increased silence where there used to be updates. Small changes in tone. A sense that something was being held back rather than simply missing. When placed into that context, the airport appearance stopped feeling random and started feeling placed. Almost like a punctuation mark in the middle of a sentence not yet finished. And then there was the question no one could stop circling back to. Why 3 seconds? Why not longer? Why not shorter? Why just enough to be seen, but not enough to be confirmed? 3 seconds is barely enough time to react. Barely enough to process, but it is more than enough time to recognize. And recognition, for a fandom like this, is powerful. It doesn't rely on clarity. It thrives in uncertainty. Fans began sharing how their reactions weren't logical, but instinctive. How they knew something was different before they even realized why. How their bodies reacted before their minds caught up. Goosebumps. Tight chests. That familiar feeling of anticipation mixed with anxiety. That kind of reaction doesn't come from nothing. It comes from history. It comes from years of watching someone grow under the spotlight, disappear from it, and now, possibly, stand just at its edge again. Not stepping fully back in. Not turning away completely. Just close enough to remind everyone of what once was and what could be again. And inevitably, the conversation shifted. From who this person might be, to who might be connected to this moment. Because fandom memory is long, and fans remember patterns. They remember timing. They remember how certain appearances in the past were never truly solo events, even when they seemed that way. They remember how silence was often shared, how distance was rarely accidental. So questions emerged that were heavier than before. If this appearance was intentional, who else knows about it? If this was a signal, who was it meant for? And if this was the beginning of something, why does it feel like only half the story has been revealed? Some fans argue that reading this deeply into a few seconds was unfair. That public figures deserve privacy, randomness, normalcy. And they weren't wrong. But even those voices struggled to explain why this moment lingered in a way others didn't. Why it refused to fade. Because usually, airport clips are consumed and forgotten within hours. Replaced by the next sighting, the next rumor, the next distraction. But this one stayed. It demanded revisiting. It asked to be rewatched, not for answers, but for feeling. And that feeling was unresolved. There was no closure in those 3 seconds. No confirmation. No denial. Just presence followed by absence. A door cracked open, but not pushed through. And for fans, that is often more powerful than any official statement. As days passed, discussions became more reflective, less frantic, more contemplative. Fans began asking not just what this moment meant, but why it affected them so deeply. Why they cared. Why it stirred emotions they thought they had already processed. Perhaps it was because this wasn't about a comeback or a sighting. Perhaps it was about connection. About the reminder that some bonds don't disappear just because they aren't visible. That some stories pause but don't end. And maybe that's why the silence mattered so much. Because it felt respectful. Because it felt cautious. Because it felt like someone standing at the threshold, aware of the weight of every step forward. If that's true, then this moment wasn't meant to excite. It was meant to prepare. Prepare fans for change. Prepare expectations for patience. Prepare emotions for something that will arrive when it's ready, not when it's demanded. And yet, uncertainty remains. Because until something more happens, everything is still speculation, still theory, still interpretation. And that space between knowing and not knowing is where fandom emotion thrives the most. Which brings us back to the question that refuses to leave. If this was nothing, why did it feel like everything paused? If this was unplanned, why did it feel so precise? And if this was just the surface, what lies beneath? Because 3 seconds were enough to remind the world that some presences don't need announcements. They don't need confirmation.